The moment Sarah's credit card statement arrived, the air in my office seemed to crackle with tension. "I just don't understand how it got this bad," she whispered, clutching the paper like a confession. Sarah sat across from me, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the bill. The document looked unassuming, just a thin piece of paper. But the weight it carried was monumental, pressing down on her slender shoulders. Her eyes darted between me and the statement, searching for some solace she hadn't yet found. "I thought I had it under control," she said softly, her voice tinged with shame. "I mean, it's just little things, you know. A pair of shoes here, a dinner out there. But somehow, she trailed off, unwilling or unable to say the number aloud. I leaned forward slightly, signaling that she could take her time. Sometimes silence is the best tool in moments like these. Sarah's words would come when she was ready. Finally, she took a deep breath and blurted it out. $9,652.47. Her voice cracked on the last word. She immediately dropped her gaze to her lap, as if the number itself was too shameful to face. "How does that make you feel, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Like a failure," she said quickly, as though the answer had been sitting on the tip of her tongue all along. "And scared. Alex is furious with me, and I don't blame him. He's so careful with money, and I." Her voice broke again, and she buried her face in her hands. "Let's take a step back," I suggested gently. "Tell me about Alex. What's his approach to money, and how does it differ from yours?" Sarah lifted her head slightly, wiping away a stray tear. "Alex grew up in a really poor household. His dad left when he was a kid, and his mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. He's terrified of being in debt, always has been. He tracks every penny, uses those budget apps religiously. Meanwhile, she paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't grow up rich, but my parents were comfortable. We didn't worry about money, at least not that I saw. And I guess I just never learned to think about it the way he does." There it was, the first crack in the foundation of their relationship. Different upbringings, different philosophies, and now, different ways of dealing with stress. "What happens when you and Alex talk about money?" I asked. Sarah laughed bitterly. "If you can call it talking. It's more like him lecturing me and me shutting down. Last night, he was pacing the living room, waving that damn credit card statement around like it was a declaration of war. He said I was irresponsible, that I don't respect him or our future. I told him he was being controlling. And then," she hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "I told him to stop acting like my dad." The room went quiet again, the weight of her words settling between us. "How did he respond to that?" I prompted. Sarah grimaced. "He didn't. He just looked at me, like I'd betrayed him. Then he said, maybe we should keep our finances separate from now on. And he walked out." I could see the guilt etched on her face, but also a hint of defiance. She wasn't ready to accept full blame for the situation, and truthfully, she shouldn't. Financial troubles in relationships are rarely about money alone, they're about control, trust, and unspoken fears. "Sarah, let's talk about what you were feeling when you said that to Alex," I said. "What made you compare him to your father?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I guess, when Alex gets like that, it reminds me of how my dad used to lecture me when I messed up. It's like I'm a little kid again, being scolded for not doing things the right way. I know he doesn't mean to, but it makes me feel small, like I can't do anything right." I nodded, making a mental note. "And when Alex calls you irresponsible, what does that bring up for you?" Her eyes filled with tears again. It hurts. I know he's probably right, but hearing it like that makes me want to dig in my heels. Like, if I'm going to be accused of being irresponsible, I might as well enjoy it, you know." Her words hung in the air, a bittersweet mix of insight and self-sabotage. Sarah, it sounds like there's a lot of pain and misunderstanding on both sides, I said. You're not spending money because you don't care about Alex or your future. You're spending because it brings you comfort in the moment. And Alex isn't budgeting because he wants to control you, he's doing it because he's scared of what could happen if you don't. Does that sound right? She nodded slowly, her expression softening. Yeah. That sounds right. For now, let's focus on your side of the equation, I continued. When you make a purchase, what's going through your mind? Are you thinking about Alex, or the budget, or the future? She shook her head. Not really. I see something I like, and I think, why not? It feels good in the moment, like I'm treating myself. But then later, when the bill comes. Her voice trailed off, and she let out a shaky laugh. I guess I don't think about the consequences until it's too late. That's a common pattern, I said reassuringly. And it's something we can work on. But it's also important to address how you and Alex communicate about these issues. Right now, it sounds like both of you are stuck in a cycle of blame and defensiveness. Breaking that cycle will take time and effort, but it's possible. Sarah nodded again, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I want to fix this, she said. Not just for Alex, but for me, too. I don't want to feel like this anymore. That's a great starting point, I said. We'll keep working on it together. As the session ended, I couldn't help but reflect on how universal Sarah and Alex's struggle was. Money might have been the battlefield, but the war was about something much deeper: love, fear, and the fragile balance of two lives trying to merge into one. Have you ever clashed with a partner over money? What worked, or didn't, for you? Share your thoughts below. The next time Sarah sat in my office, her energy was different. She wasn't clutching a credit card statement this time, but her body language still screamed tension. She hugged herself tightly as she spoke, as if trying to hold something fragile together. After last week's session, I tried talking to Alex, she began, her tone laced with hesitation. I told him I wanted us to work through this together, that I'd been avoiding the money stuff because it made me feel ashamed, I guess. But he said he doesn't understand why I feel that way. She sighed deeply and shook her head. He said, Sarah, it's not rocket science. You just don't spend what you don't have. Like it's that simple. The frustration in her voice was palpable, and I could see how much she longed for Alex to understand her perspective. Why do you think he reacts that way? I asked. I think he really believes that money is black and white. You're either responsible or you're not. For him, budgeting and saving come naturally. He loves his spreadsheets, his color-coded charts. He even has this emergency fund he adds to every month. She smiled faintly, but the admiration in her tone quickly faded. It's just so different for me. Spending isn't about numbers, it's about feelings. Feelings? I prompted gently. Sarah's voice grew quieter as she explained. I know it sounds silly, but buying things makes me feel good. Like I'm treating myself, or proving to myself that I can have nice things. It's not really about the stuff, it's about the momentary high. I nodded, familiar with the emotional underpinnings of impulsive spending. So, when you make a purchase, what's the feeling you're chasing? Is it happiness, relief, something else? She thought for a moment, then said, I think it's validation. Like, when I buy something I want, it's like I'm saying, I deserve this. And for a little while, I actually believe it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken layers. Did you ever feel like you didn't deserve things? I asked carefully. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked away. Maybe, she said after a pause. Growing up, my parents weren't strict, but they were frugal. I remember asking for things and hearing, do you really need that, a lot? It wasn't mean, just practical. But I guess it stuck with me, this feeling that wanting something wasn't enough of a reason to have it. That's an important realization, I said. It sounds like you're using spending to rewrite an old narrative. You're telling yourself, I'm allowed to want this, and I'm allowed to have it. She nodded slowly, as if the idea resonated. But Alex sees it differently, she said after a moment. For him, money is security. He doesn't care about wanting things, he cares about protecting what we have. It's like we're speaking two different languages. I decided to lean into her metaphor. If you were to translate Alex's language, what do you think he's really saying when he gets upset about your spending? Sarah frowned, clearly unprepared for the question. I guess, he's saying he's scared. That he doesn't want to end up like his mom, struggling to make ends meet. That's a compassionate interpretation, I said. Now, let's look at your own language. When you spend money, what do you think you're saying to Alex? Her expression shifted to one of guilt. Probably something like, I don't care about your feelings or our future. Even though that's not true. Exactly, I said. Neither of you is actually saying what you mean, but the message you're sending is still being received, and it's hurtful on both sides. Sarah let out a frustrated sigh. I don't know how to fix it. We're just so different. Differences don't have to be a deal breaker, I said. In fact, they can complement each other. Alex's practicality can provide stability, while your emotional approach can bring joy and spontaneity. But for that to happen, you both need to understand where the other is coming from. Sarah considered this for a moment before shaking her head. He doesn't try to understand me, though. He just wants me to change. To be more like him. Her words struck a chord, and I decided to dig deeper. Do you think Alex sees your spending as a personal flaw? Yes, she said without hesitation. He makes it sound like it's this huge moral failing, like I'm selfish or careless. But I'm not. I'm just different. That's an important distinction, I said. And it's one you may need to help Alex see. Have you ever explained to him why you spend the way you do? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. I don't think I've even explained it to myself until now. That's okay, I reassured her. Self-awareness is the first step. The next step is sharing that awareness with Alex in a way he can understand. Her face clouded with doubt. What if he doesn't want to understand? What if he just wants me to be like him? Then that's a different conversation, I said honestly. But from what you've told me, Alex cares about you and your future together. His fear might be making him rigid, but fear is a powerful motivator. If you can show him that you're willing to work on this, not just for him, but for yourself, I think he'll meet you halfway. Sarah didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. I'll try, she said quietly. As the session wound down, I asked her to reflect on a specific moment when her spending clashed with Alex's budgeting and to write down how it made her feel, what she was trying to communicate, and how Alex might have interpreted it. Sometimes the hardest part of these conversations is separating intention from impact, I said as she gathered her things. But understanding both is key to moving forward. She left with a faint but determined smile, and I felt hopeful for her progress. Sarah and Alex weren't just navigating financial differences, they were wrestling with deep-seated fears and unmet needs. Their clashing mindsets weren't a dead end, they were an opportunity for growth. Whether they could seize that opportunity would depend on their willingness to bridge the gap, one honest conversation at a time. Who do you relate to more, Sarah or Alex? Let us know in the comments. Sarah's energy was different again when she entered my office for her next session. This time, she seemed restless, her movements jittery, her eyes darting to the clock even though the session had just begun. Something weighed heavily on her, and I didn't have to wait long for her to reveal it. I lied to Alex, she admitted before even sitting down. Her voice was hushed, almost as if saying the words out loud made them more real. Not just once, over and over. And now he knows. The tension in the room became almost palpable as she slumped into the chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Tell me what happened, I said gently. She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. So, after our last session, I decided I needed to do something to prove to Alex that I was serious about changing. I started looking at my finances and realized I've been hiding things. I didn't even mean to at first, but it just snowballed. There's this credit card he doesn't know about, and I've been using it for stuff I didn't want to argue about, clothes, dinners with friends, that kind of thing. And then I kept using it to cover up the other debt because I was afraid of how he'd react if he knew how bad it was. Her voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes quickly, as if ashamed of her tears. I was going to tell him, but before I could, he found the statement. It came in the mail, and he opened it by mistake. Or maybe he was suspicious, I don't know. Either way, he saw everything. She paused, shaking her head. I've never seen him so angry. He kept asking, how could you hide this from me? How could you lie to me? And I didn't have an answer. Because he's right, I did lie. And now he doesn't trust me. Honestly, I don't even trust myself anymore. Her words were raw, filled with guilt and self-recrimination. I let her sit with them for a moment before responding. It sounds like this has been incredibly hard for both of you, I said. What do you think made you hide the credit card in the first place? She looked down at her hands, twisting a ring around her finger. I guess I just didn't want to deal with the fallout. Alex already thinks I'm irresponsible with money, and I didn't want to give him more reasons to judge me. I thought if I could handle it on my own, he'd never have to know. And how did it feel to keep that secret? I asked. Awful, she admitted. Every time I used the card, I felt this knot in my stomach. But I told myself it was fine because I'd fix it eventually. Except I didn't. I just kept digging the hole deeper. Her voice softened as she added, and now I'm terrified that I've ruined everything. Sarah, hiding things, especially in relationships, often comes from a place of fear, I said. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of losing something important. But secrets have a way of eroding trust, even if they're kept with good intentions. She nodded slowly, her expression pained. I know. And I hate that I've hurt him. But at the same time, I feel like he doesn't get how hard this is for me. It's like he expects me to be perfect, and I'm just not. Have you told him that? I asked. Her brow furrowed. No. I don't know how. Every time we try to talk about this, it turns into a fight. He just keeps saying he can't believe I lied, and I keep saying I'm sorry, but it doesn't feel like enough. Apologies are important, I said, but they're only one piece of the puzzle. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, it takes consistent action and open communication. The question is, are you both willing to do the work? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. I think so. I mean, I want to. I'm just not sure if he does. He said something last night that really scared me. He said, maybe we're just too different. Her voice broke again, and she covered her face with her hands. What if he's right? What if this is the thing that breaks us? I leaned forward, my tone calm but firm. Differences don't have to break a relationship, Sarah. What matters is how you handle them. This isn't just about money, it's about trust, understanding, and compromise. Those things can be rebuilt, but only if both of you are committed to the process. She lowered her hands, her eyes filled with uncertainty. And if he's not? Then you have a decision to make, I said gently. But let's not jump to conclusions. Have you and Alex talked about how you're going to move forward? Not really, she admitted. He's been so upset that I've been afraid to bring it up. But I know I can't avoid it forever. Exactly, I said. The longer you wait, the harder it will be. But before you talk to Alex, it might help to get clear on what you want to say. What are the most important things you need him to understand? She thought for a moment, then said, I need him to know that I didn't hide this to hurt him or because I don't care. I need him to know that I feel terrible about what I've done and that I want to make it right. And I guess I need him to know that I need help. That I can't fix this alone. That's a good start, I said. It's okay to admit you need support. Relationships are partnerships, and part of being a partner is helping each other through hard times. She nodded, her expression softening slightly. I just hope he sees it that way. Sarah, you can't control how Alex responds, I said. But you can control how you approach the situation. Be honest, take responsibility, and show him that you're committed to change. The rest is up to him. She nodded again, her resolve slowly building. I'll try. I don't want to lose him. You're taking the first step by being here and by being willing to have that conversation, I said. That's not easy, but it's important. As the session ended, I could see that Sarah was still scared, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She wasn't ready to give up, not on Alex, and not on herself. But I knew the road ahead would be challenging. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. And secrets, once exposed, leave scars. Whether Sarah and Alex could navigate those challenges together remained to be seen. For now, though, Sarah was ready to take the next step. And sometimes, that's enough. Should couples share everything about their finances? What's your take? Comment below. Sarah's voice was tight with tension as she sat down for our next session, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as though she'd spent the night crying. It was clear she was on the verge of an emotional unraveling. It all blew up, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything we've been holding back, it all came out last night. And I don't know if we can come back from it. She paused, staring at the carpet as if it might provide answers. Take your time, I said gently. She took a shaky breath and began. After our last session, I decided to be honest with Alex. I told him everything, about the credit card, the debt, even why I've been spending the way I have. I thought if I explained it to him, maybe he'd understand. But, he didn't. Her voice wavered, and she pressed her lips together tightly. What happened? I prompted softly. He was furious, she said, her tone cracking under the weight of the memory. He kept saying he couldn't believe I lied to him again, that I've been making all these decisions behind his back while pretending everything was fine. And the worst part is, I get it. I'd be angry, too. But then he said. She paused, her face contorting as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. He said he doesn't know if he can trust me anymore. And if he can't trust me, how can we have a future together? Her words hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy with despair. That must have been incredibly painful to hear, I said. She nodded, her expression haunted. It was. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like he'd already decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. And I don't know how to change his mind. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I told him I was sorry. I told him I wanted to fix this, that I'd do whatever it takes. But he just kept saying, how can I believe you? You've said that before. And then I lost it. I started yelling, saying he's not perfect either, that he makes me feel like a failure all the time. I said. Her voice broke again, and she covered her face with her hands. I said maybe I wouldn't have to hide things if he wasn't so controlling. And that was it. That was the moment he snapped. What did he say? I asked. Her hands fell to her lap, and her gaze turned hollow. He said, if you think I'm controlling, maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do. And maybe I don't know you, either. Then he walked out. He didn't even take his keys, just walked out into the night. She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. I don't even know where he went. He hasn't called, hasn't texted. I don't know if he's coming back. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat frozen, as if she didn't trust herself to move. "Sarah," I said gently, "it sounds like you both reached a breaking point last night. And while that can feel devastating, it can also be an opportunity. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt." Her brow furrowed, and she looked at me with a mix of skepticism and desperation. "How can we rebuild if you won't even talk to me?" "Right now, it sounds like Alex is reacting from a place of hurt and anger," I said. "That doesn't mean he's given up, it just means he needs time to process. The question is, how do you want to use this time?" She hesitated, then said, "I don't know. I feel like I've already done everything I can. I've apologized, I've promised to change, what else is there?" "There's accountability," I said. "Not just in words, but in actions. Rebuilding trust isn't about making promises, it's about showing, consistently, that you're committed to change. Have you thought about what that might look like?" She frowned, clearly uncertain. "I guess I could start by making a plan to pay off the debt. But isn't that obvious? Isn't that what I should have been doing all along?" "Yes, it is," I said. "But the difference now is that you're not just doing it for Alex, you're doing it for yourself. To show yourself that you can take control of this situation." She nodded slowly, a spark of determination returning to her eyes. "I guess I could try setting a budget, too. Like, really sticking to one this time. And maybe showing it to Alex, so he knows I'm serious." "That's a good start," I said. "But remember, this isn't just about the numbers. It's about addressing the feelings that drive your spending habits. Have you thought about how you might approach that?" Her gaze dropped again. "I don't know. It's so hard to stop in the moment. Spending is like an escape for me. It's the one thing I do that feels good, even if it's only for a little while." "That's an important insight," I said. "What if you found other ways to create that feeling? Ways that don't involve spending money?" She looked skeptical but intrigued. "Like what?" "That depends on what you're looking for in those moments," I said. "Is it comfort, excitement, validation? Once you understand the feeling you're chasing, you can start finding healthier ways to meet that need." She nodded thoughtfully. "I guess I could try journaling. Or maybe going for a walk instead of online shopping. But what about Alex? What if he doesn't come back?" "If that happens, you'll still have yourself," I said. "And that's the person you need to take care of first. Whether Alex decides to stay or go, you'll be in a better place if you've started working on these changes for you, not just for him." She bit her lip, her expression torn. "I don't want to lose him. But I also don't want to feel like this anymore. Like I'm always one step away from disappointing him." "Then start with yourself," I said. "Focus on what you can control. The rest will come in time." As the session ended, Sarah left with a sense of purpose, albeit a fragile one. She didn't know if Alex would return, but for the first time, she seemed ready to confront her own patterns, to take responsibility not just for her mistakes but for her healing. The breaking point they'd reached wasn't a guarantee of resolution, but it was an opening, a chance to rebuild trust, both in her relationship and in herself. Whether that chance would be taken remained to be seen. Have you ever hit a breaking point in a relationship? How did you handle it? Share your story. When Sarah walked into my office this time, her demeanor had shifted. There was still a hint of tension in her shoulders, but it was softened by a newfound determination. Her eyes, though tired, held a spark I hadn't seen before. She sat down and took a deep breath, her posture more confident than it had been in weeks. "He came back," she said, her voice steady. I offered her an encouraging nod. "How did it go?" "It was hard," she admitted, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "When Alex walked through the door, I didn't know what to expect. He looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying this weight around. For a moment, I thought he might still be angry, but then he just sat down and said, we need to talk. She paused, her lips curving into a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't the easiest conversation, but it was the most honest one we've ever had. Tell me about it, I prompted gently. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I started by apologizing again. Not just for the spending and the lying, but for shutting him out when he tried to help. I told him I understood why he felt betrayed and that I wanted to rebuild the trust I'd broken. And then I listened. Really listened. I didn't interrupt or try to defend myself. I just let him talk. Her eyes glistened with emotion as she continued. Alex told me how scared he's been, not just about the money, but about our relationship. He said he's afraid we want different things, that we're on different paths. But he also said he doesn't want to give up on us. Hearing those words seemed to ignite a deeper resolve in Sarah. I told him I didn't want to give up either. That I know we have a lot of work to do, but I'm ready to do it, together. He seemed relieved, but he also made it clear that he needs to see real changes, not just hear promises. And I get that. I really do. What changes are you planning to make? I asked. Sarah sat up straighter, her expression firm. The first thing I did was make a detailed plan to pay off the debt. I showed it to Alex, and we went over it together. He even offered to help with some of the budgeting tools he uses, but I told him I wanted to do most of it myself. I think he respected that. That sounds like a good step, I said. How does it feel to take control of your finances like this? She smiled faintly. Honestly, it's empowering. I always thought budgeting would feel restrictive, like it was taking something away from me. But now, it feels like I'm gaining control instead of losing it. She paused, her gaze thoughtful. I've also started journaling, like you suggested. It helps me figure out what I'm really feeling when I get the urge to spend. The other day, I realized I wasn't even upset about money, I was upset because I felt like Alex wasn't listening to me. Instead of buying something, I wrote it all down and talked to him about it later. And you know what? He actually listened. The pride in her voice was undeniable, and I couldn't help but smile. It sounds like you're making progress on multiple fronts, I said. How has Alex responded to these changes? He's been cautiously optimistic, she said, her smile fading slightly. He told me he's proud of the steps I'm taking, but he's also afraid I might fall back into old habits. I don't blame him, it's going to take time to prove that I'm serious. That's a natural reaction, I said. Trust takes time to rebuild, but the fact that he's acknowledging your progress is a good sign. How do you feel about his concerns? I get it, she said with a small shrug. I know I've broken his trust before, and I can't expect him to just forget about that. But I also know I'm not the same person I was a few weeks ago. I'm not making these changes for him anymore, I'm making them for me. And that's what I told him. Her expression grew more confident as she added, I think he believed me. And even if he didn't, I'll show him. We spent the rest of the session discussing practical strategies for maintaining her progress, including ways to handle potential setbacks and how to keep the lines of communication open with Alex. As the session came to a close, Sarah seemed lighter, more at peace with herself. But there was one question lingering in her mind, and I could see it in the way she hesitated before standing up to leave. Something on your mind? I asked. She hesitated, then said, Do you think we'll make it? Me and Alex? I gave her a thoughtful look. That depends on both of you. Relationships take work, and they're rarely perfect. But you've both shown that you're willing to try, and that's a strong foundation to build on. She nodded slowly, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. I guess we'll see. You're already doing the hard part, I said. The rest is just one step at a time. As she walked out of my office, I couldn't help but feel proud of how far she'd come. Sarah had started this journey consumed by guilt and fear, convinced that her mistakes had irreparably damaged her relationship. But now, she was taking ownership of her actions, confronting the emotional triggers behind her spending, and learning to communicate more openly with Alex. Whether their relationship would ultimately survive was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: Sarah was growing, both as a partner and as an individual. And that growth, I believed, would carry her forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. What do you think of Sarah and Alex's journey? Have you been through something similar? Let us know. It had been 3 months since Sarah's journey began, and when she walked into my office for what she described as her final session, the transformation was remarkable. The tense, uncertain woman I first met had given way to someone who carried herself with newfound confidence. Her smile was genuine, her posture relaxed, and the nervous energy that once defined her was gone. "I guess this is it," she said, settling into her chair with a sense of ease I hadn't seen before. "I just wanted to come back and thank you for everything." I smiled warmly. "You did the hard work, Sarah. I just helped guide you through it." She nodded thoughtfully. "It doesn't feel like work anymore. I mean, there's still a lot to do, but it's different now. Alex and we're different now." Her words carried a weight of relief and pride, and I was eager to hear more. "Tell me about it," I said. Sarah's face lit up as she spoke. "We've started having weekly budget meetings, together. At first, I thought it was going to be awful, but it's actually been really good for us. We sit down, go over everything we spent that week, and make decisions about what's next. It's not about blaming or controlling, it's about being on the same page." "That sounds like a big step forward," I said. "It is," she agreed. "And it's helped us both understand each other better. Like, Alex has realized that it's not just about numbers for me, it's about emotions, too. And I've learned that budgeting isn't about deprivation, it's about making choices that align with what we really want." Her tone grew more reflective as she added, "It's not just about the money anymore. It's about trust, communication, and compromise. We're finally working as a team, and that's made all the difference." I leaned forward slightly. "What about you, personally? How have you been managing the emotional triggers behind your spending?" Sarah smiled, her expression a mix of pride and humility. "I've been journaling a lot, like you suggested. Whenever I feel the urge to buy something, I stop and write down what I'm feeling instead. It's helped me recognize patterns I didn't even know were there. Like, I've realized that I tend to shop when I feel overwhelmed or inadequate, like buying something new will somehow fix those feelings. But now, I'm learning to sit with those emotions instead of running from them." She paused, her gaze steady. "It's not always easy, but it's been worth it. I feel more in control of myself now than I ever have." "That's an incredible accomplishment," I said. "It sounds like you've gained not just financial clarity, but emotional clarity as well." She nodded, her smile growing. "Exactly. And Alex has been really supportive. He's still cautious, it's going to take time to fully rebuild the trust we lost, but he's also noticed the changes I'm making, and that's helped us both feel more optimistic about the future." Her voice softened as she added, "We're not perfect, but we're trying. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believe we can make it." We spent the rest of the session reflecting on her journey, the mistakes, the lessons, and the progress she'd made. It was clear that Sarah had grown in ways she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just repairing her relationship with Alex, she was also building a healthier relationship with herself. As our time together drew to a close, I offered her one last piece of advice. "Remember, this journey isn't about perfection," I said. "It's about progress. There will be setbacks, and that's okay. What matters is how you respond to them, and from what I've seen, you're more than capable of handling whatever comes your way." Sarah's eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you for helping me see that I'm not defined by my mistakes, and for showing me that change is possible." She stood and extended her hand, a gesture of both gratitude and closure. As I shook her hand, I felt a sense of pride, not just in her progress, but in the resilience and strength she discovered within herself. When Sarah walked out of my office that day, I knew her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and unexpected hurdles. But she was leaving with the tools, the insight, and the determination to face those challenges head-on. As I reflected on Sarah's story, I couldn't help but think about how universal her struggles were. Financial problems in relationships are rarely just about money. They're about trust, communication, and the deeper fears and desires that money represents. For Sarah, spending was a way to seek comfort and validation. For Alex, budgeting was a way to protect himself from the instability of his past. Their conflict wasn't about numbers, it was about the unspoken messages behind their actions. But through honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to grow, they found a way to bridge the gap. They learned to see each other not as opponents, but as partners, working toward a common goal. And in doing so, they reminded me of an important truth, that even the most difficult challenges can be opportunities for growth, if we're willing to face them with courage and compassion. Financial issues are often a symptom of deeper emotional and relational struggles. Take the time to understand not just the what, but the why behind your financial habits. Communication and transparency are key to building trust, especially when dealing with sensitive topics like money. Change takes time, but small, consistent steps can lead to lasting transformation. Have you ever faced financial challenges in a relationship? What lessons did you learn, and how did you navigate them? Share your story or tips below.